Speaker of the House Kevin McCarthy's Republican conference has brought us to the brink of another government shutdown a little over more than 24 hours from now. The Democratic Senate has just done its part, advancing broadly bipartisan legislation to keep the government funded and therefore open. The House could very easily do the same thing based on a budget framework they already agreed to. Remember we went through this? Part of the deal they struck over the summer to raise the debt ceiling. Kevin McCarthy met with Joe Biden. They worked it out. They struck a deal. But now they don't like that. They won't sign on to it. Right now, it looks like that's not going to happen. You see, there's a small group in the House that wants a shutdown and wants McCarthy to lose his job as Speaker, partly because they want to enact severe, drastic, brutally cruel, unprecedented austerity cuts to a bunch of different social programs, like stuff for women and infant children or to poor schools, and partly because Donald Trump told them to. Today, Speaker McCarthy tried to appease his conference with a wildly extreme government funding bill that did a lot of those cruel cuts. But even that failed when 21 mostly MAGA Republicans sunk the deal. The thing that's really so important to understand about this shutdown is that probably, I would say, 98% of members of Congress across both houses think it's utterly stupid. They think the people pushing this shutdown are dangerous fools. Just listen to Republican Congressman Mike Lawler of New York.
There's only one person to blame for any potential government shutdown, and that's Matt Gaetz. He's not a conservative Republican, he's a charlatan. And as far as I'm concerned, when you're working with Democrats to try to vacate the Speaker, you're a joke.
Okay. Now, Lawler may be correct that Gaetz is a charlatan, but he's incorrect that there is one person to blame here. What he is missing is that Matt Gaetz is perfectly in line with and taking his orders directly from another Republican, guy you've probably heard of, the quadruple indicted, disgraced ex-president Donald Trump. Gaetz openly boasted about this much last week when he took to Trump's social media platform to share this quote from an article about the shutdown. Quote, President Donald Trump said Republicans should reject the Speaker's plan. There you have it, folks. Trump said we should reject a deal, and we're rejecting the deal. The open public disdain House Republicans hold for someone like Matt Gaetz and his Confederates in the extremist wing of the party should, of course, be exactly how they view Donald Trump, the guy calling the shots. And indeed, if Donald Trump, that guy, the guy you see on your screen, if he were just some random member of the Freedom Caucus from a safe Republican district, Republicans would roll their eyes at him and they'd complain about him to the press like tough guy Mike Lawler does about Matt Gaetz. But do you think Mike Lawler says that about Donald Trump? No, he does not. No, he does not. Because Donald Trump is not just some random congressional backbencher. No, that's easy for Mike Lawler to do. Donald Trump is the most powerful figure in the Republican Party. And Republicans in the House, Kevin McCarthy in particular, are learning the same lesson that the rest of us learned nearly a decade ago. That it's impossible to negotiate with Donald Trump and those doing his bidding because their demands are effectively impossible to give into. If you look at what Trump has said about the shutdown, and you ask, what does he want? He wants his criminal cases closed. He wants the prosecutors fired or worse. He wants to effectively end the American rule of law. He wants to install himself as the authoritarian leader of this country. When he gets the nomination of the Republican Party, Mike Lawler is probably going to endorse him. Those are Donald Trump's demands, and by extension, the demands of many of his MAGA obstructionists in Congress. Kevin McCarthy knows he can't give in, but he's such a weak leader, it's not clear if he has an alternative. Ben LaBilt serves as White House Communications Director, and he joins me now. Ben, what is the White House's current understanding of what happens now? It's my job to follow this, and I will admit that I am confused.
Well, look, it's very possible we go into a shutdown tomorrow night at midnight. And as you laid out right there, this is totally the fault of House Republicans and the MAGA wing in the party. This is another manufactured crisis by them. They threatened to crash the economy earlier this year over the debt ceiling crisis, which they also manufactured. But out of that, they agreed to a bipartisan budget agreement with the president, with the House, with the Senate, that laid out a plan to fund the government moving forward. Well, now they're walking away from that. Speaker Gingrich, who used to shut down the government at the drop of a hat, said he didn't even know what this was about or why they wanted to shut down the government this time around. As you pointed out, they take their orders from Donald Trump. The MAGA wing of the party seems to be in control here, and unless their extreme list of ideological demands is met, they're going to shut things down tomorrow night.
what is how do you understand the end game? Like, that's the thing that I just, because of what Speaker Gingrich said and what others have said, you know, there's a few different ones, right? So you could have Kevin McCarthy bring something to the House floor that he knows will lose some Republicans, but will pass with large bipartisan majorities. For instance, the Senate CR. Some kind of discharge position in which the, 8 or 9 Republicans team up with Democrats to bring something to the floor, or what? How do you understand it?
Well, look, the end game that would make sense for the American people and that the president supports is most of the leaders in Congress and the president have agreed on a plan to fund the government. Right. Leader McConnell has agreed on that plan. Leader Schumer's agreed on that plan. Leader Jeffries has agreed on that plan. The president thinks the Senate should pass that legislation and the House should pass that legislation. And then we wouldn't have active duty troops going without pay. We wouldn't have women and children who need food assistance having access to food this week. We wouldn't have travel disruptions at the FAA and all the other things that will happen if the government shuts down. But what's clear is that Speaker McCarthy may not have control over his conference. This is something that he needs to work out with the MAGA wing of the party if the government is going to stay open, and he needs to take control here.
Marjorie Taylor Greene said, I think today or yesterday, I think it was today, that a shutdown would be salutary. I shouldn't use that word, but it would be good, maybe bracing for the American people, for Washington, to understand what it was like to shut down during COVID, I think was the argument. Do you think there's any upside to a shutdown?
Look, this is the same sort of ideology over outcomes that we've heard from the MAGA wing of the party, where they'd rather prove a point than help serve the daily lives of hardworking people across the country. And they're playing with fire here. So many people will be impacted. So many people will be forced to go to work, but without pay. That's going to have an impact on morale. It's going to have an impact on attendance and the basic operations of the government that a lot of people across the country rely on every day. If you have a problem with your Social Security check, for example, who can you call if government workers are furloughed? Why would we put active duty troops on the line here and refuse to pay them when 2 million of them are defending our country? So this is just about, pleasing their ideological extreme factions, getting cable hits, making extreme headlines. And it's hardworking Americans that'll pay the price.
Yeah, not just cable hits. We're doing some podcast hits. So I just want to be fair. After the meeting today, a bunch of them, Andy Biggs, I think, they all did like a group emergency pod. So I think they did get some good podcast content, which, you got to respect that. This is what the president had to say in a sit-down interview earlier today with John Harwood from ProPublica about his views on why this is happening. Take a listen.
The speaker's made a terrible bargain. In order to keep the speakership, he's willing to do things that I think he knows are inconsistent with constitutional processes, number one. Number two, I think it says that there is a group of mega Republicans who genuinely want to have a fundamental change in the way the system works. And that's what worries me the most.
That fundamental change, how should we understand what he means by that?
Well, I think he really addressed it in Phoenix yesterday when he was honoring John McCain, talking about the need to preserve democratic institutions in this country after a series of comments that have been made by the MAGA wing of the party over the past several weeks. They have attacked the free press. They have attacked the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff of the military, accused him of treason, said in a different time he would have been executed. They've said a bunch of things that could incite political violence and certainly don't speak to preserving democratic institutions in this country. They don't believe in the separation of powers, and that is not politics as usual. That's an extreme threat to our democracy.
Yeah, in point of fact, Paul Gosar, a Republican member from Arizona, said that in another time, the sodomy-loving Quisling would be hung. That's what he had to say about Joint Chiefs of Staff Milley. Ben LeBolt, thank you very much.